Kid, thank you very much for coming today. So for whom you don't know, Kid runs the toughest, the meanest, the most qualified CTA study group in the world. It's easy to say, the Benelux study group, which is technically based still in Benelux, correct? But it's a virtual study group around the world.
I'm based out of Amsterdam, so that's in Benelux, because it's Benelux stands for Belgium, Netherlands, Luxembourg. But I run together with Jonida, and she's based in Germany. And since 2 weeks, also with Amit Datta and Slava Pataran. And while they're not from the Netherlands, they are now also based in the Netherlands. So it's mostly based out of Benelux again.
Hey, the Netherlands attract the best Salesforce talent globally currently. So many of my good friends are going to the Netherlands. What's up with that?
I don't know. I think we're an attractive country for senior architects and experienced Salesforce people.
Nice. So why I call you today, Kid, is a few weeks ago, you made the jump in LinkedIn. You told us all you made it to director at Capgemini. And I found, right. Congratulations first. And I found your career really impressive. And we already chatted last week a little bit long enough. And I took away so much. I want to start first with a simple question. You talked about the topic of let's do it that way. You started out with a small consultancy and then moved to a bigger one. And you think this is actually the better way of becoming an architect, first starting at a small one, then moving on to a bigger consultancy. Why do you think like that, Kid?
Well, because if you start out at a small consulting partner with maybe 20, 25 people, then your project team will automatically also be smaller. Can be 2 people, can be 5 people, what typically not much more than that, which means you have to be multidisciplinary. You are not just an architect, you're not just a consultant or a developer. You're usually 3, 4, or even 5 of those roles, especially if you're in the lead. You might be the project manager, at the same time architect, but also consultant, maybe developer, a little bit of business analyst. So you can have 5 roles on a single project. And even though the projects are smaller and less complex, simpler, it's a great way to get started in all those roles and learn the basics. And most importantly, like learn the mistakes, because even if you do them on small projects, you'll already learn where the difficulties are, where the challenges are. And those are quite similar in much larger organizations. It just scales up, but the issues are very alike.
Yeah. We talked about one of the, let's say, tasks you did in order to earn your promotion was literally a data migration, wasn't it?
To play a large role in it. I recently had a very large go live for one of my clients. Was a very long program with almost 30 systems, 3 years of development. And we had a big bang go live after those 3 years. And the challenge was that last minute, another partner said that they couldn't provide us with the data migration input files as we agreed earlier. So I had to transfer that and migrate that myself, because we couldn't onboard a new team during that go live week we were already in. So that was a large challenge, but yeah, I made it through, and that definitely helped with my promotion, because I've got a really nice endorsement from the CTIO from that client.
So you tell me the experience I made 10 years ago being a lonely admin who does data migration on small project still could earn me the promotion to director, not alone, but could help me on my way to do a career?
Every skill you have works. Like, it doesn't matter what you learned. I've had some times that I use skills that I used 10 years, 15 years ago and not used since. And then it becomes applicable again, like, I did that once. And you try to find that you still have some artifacts or some scripts or other reusable parts. And if not, you have to refamiliarize yourself with it. But then it still helps to have already done it before, because you still vaguely remember what the challenges are, how to quickly learn it. And those things can make a huge difference, especially when it's critical, when you are in a go live week, you have a deadline to make, and you might be already beyond the point of no return, like it's now fixed forward, and then you have to fix it, and every minute counts. So then every skill you have helps, because when push comes to shove, even if you are an architect now, you still have to be at every role if nobody else is available. It's not like, yeah, but I'm an architect now, so the developer should do this. No, if you can do it, you do it.
I like that approach, and I hope, like we talked about, you told me that the big difference is with larger projects to smaller projects. I'm super curious that you say everything is just bigger, and especially you have more levels of management.
Yes, that's right. So in a small team, you don't have any levels. It's a flat organization, like you are just with 5 people, so it's not like you have a real hierarchy. But if you're in a program or project with maybe dozens or even hundreds or 2,000 people, and those also exist, then of course you need to have some sense of hierarchy to manage the organization. Doesn't mean that it has to feel very hierarchical, but someone has to be in charge. You cannot have 200 captains on one ship. So then you see that there are multiple levels of architect. There's one chief enterprise architect who manages the whole program, and he would then lead, if it's really a multidisciplinary program, data architects, solution architects for multiple vendors or stacks or platforms, security architects, integration architects, basically every architect dimension you can think of. And they in turn would have their team of architect specialists that might specialize in subdomains of that dimension or subdomains of that vendor or stack. And below that would be development teams that realize that architecture, that implement it.
Oh, and you mentioned something interesting before it, that the SAFe framework or TOGAF is one way of how you communicate with other architects. When did you learn your first framework, or when did you use it first?
When I used it first, well, that's an interesting one, because to be honest, I've never really had an implementation that really used TOGAF in a literal way or even implemented it. Same with SAFe. For me, they are more like toolbox knowledge. They're good to have in your backpack. I learned my first framework in my first year at Capgemini, and that was TOGAF. SAFe, and TOGAF in the second year. But I never had any project that used them directly. I mostly used small parts of it. And like you say, I use it to communicate with other architects that don't understand Salesforce. So for instance, you have the TOGAF ADM, which has various phases of architecture, but those correlate better with more traditional architecture where you do everything from scratch and also have your own infrastructure, like your own network infrastructure, your own servers, etc. Which is a completely different architecture process compared to multi-tenant cloud, SaaS, and PaaS solutions,
so it helps you
over the infrastructure, but then you have to communicate
to understand
with other architects.
So it helps you to understand how they think, not only to communicate, but also their thinking, because they might wonder, when do we do our hardware? Or
yeah, but also to map different phases in the process, like how you come to an architecture. Like do you start with business architecture and then move on to solution architecture? And for instance, with TOGAF, you also have the separation between sort of a conceptual architecture, where it's architecture defined by requirements, and then make it specific and turn those requirements into solutions. Like TOGAF uses the concepts architectural building blocks and solution building blocks for that. And if architects outside of the Salesforce ecosystem are familiar with that, then it can help you translate your process to something that they are familiar with, which increases the collaboration.
Got it. Because I found communicating with non-Salesforce IT people always a little tricky as Salesforce people. I find it easier to talk to salespeople than to IT people. I don't know about you.
No, mostly IT people, but I understand what you mean when you say that it's sometimes difficult to talk to architects or IT specialists that are not familiar with Salesforce, or at least that are not familiar with other SaaS and cloud and multi-tenant solutions, because that's really where the difference is.
We are really strange, because they have, like, let's say, Yeah, in the sense, we are honestly, we have so much of the issues they deal on a day-to-day basis just abstracted away for us.
Yeah, exactly. Like we don't have to deal with those things, and that makes a huge difference. Like we don't have to think about CPU power or about RAM or the bandwidth of your network or the EOPS of your SSD or hard drive. That's not our concern. That's something that's managed by Salesforce. It's abstracted to us in the form of Self-governor limits. So you have to understand the governor limits, and it helps you as an architect to understand how those translate to the underlying architecture that you cannot see. But that architecture itself, you don't have to worry about too much because you have no influence over it. The only way in which you have to worry about it is that your solution is compatible with it.
Nice. This is a good other thing I took away from you is you told me clients they only care about how it's done once it starts breaking. Maybe you tell our audience what you mean with that.
Well, the thing is that clients typically want solutions cheap. They want to have it as quickly as possible because time to market makes a difference. Like it matters to be first, or at least to be among the first. And they want something that's simple, that's easy to understand. And sometimes that doesn't work together with sales best practices, with good architecture principles, with non-functional requirements, standard design and development principles and patterns. So then you have to justify to the clients why they should go for a more expensive solution that takes more effort, so more cost, but also more time, so it will take longer before they have it available to them. So they might ask you to provide a cheaper and quicker to implement solution. But then if that later breaks or doesn't scale anymore with their growth, like if they have 5% organic growth, then first year it's only 5%, but then it becomes exponential, of course. So after a couple of years, those 5% per year still add up quite a bit. If your solution doesn't scale with that, then it might break after 2 or 3 years. And if it's then hard to modify or hard to extend, then you have to start from scratch and still build that more complex solution. And that can be a good strategy, for instance, with startups or scale-ups, because they don't really have a clear direction yet. They can go in every direction because they only just started. So that might be good sometimes to go with a simpler, quick solution and extend later on, or even replace later on.
I'm a big fan of replacing later on. Nowadays, for a startup in the first 2 years, always quote me that build a dirty org, replace it after 2 years, because you don't know what you do anyway.
Yeah, well, a whole org, of course, is very difficult to replace because then you have to justify that sunk cost is acceptable, which is always a difficult discussion. But if it's a mature corporate client that's been around for decades already, then they probably won't like, in hindsight, going for the quick and dirty solution, but they might still ask for it when push comes to shove because they need something quickly. And then you have to make sure that what you build is robust enough, at least for the time being, and that it doesn't go too far down on the backlog that they completely forget about it. Like, hey, if it's not a sustainable, future-proof solution, then at some point we need to modify it, we need to improve it, extend it. And if that doesn't happen, then at some point it will break, and then it will point to you like, hey, what did you do? You provide the solution to me, and it's already broken after a year.
And the excuse, but you asked me to build it cheaper, does not work because you are the trusted advisor. Is that correct?
Exactly. That's your role as a consultant, as a implementation partner. Like, you have to be the good partner, so you have to also safeguard the client from themselves sometimes. Like, they might ask you for something that is not a smart direction, not a safe decision to take.
Mm-hmm. This is a very interesting point about let's say the hacks. Hey, we both grew up in an industry which was famous for the hacks, the Salesforce industry. You remember?
Oh yes,
The,
definitely.
we traded them, we shared them, we got applauded for them, we bragged who had the most hacks in their work. What do you do with hacks nowadays?
I sure didn't.
But you know what? You remove them. Now, what do you think about?
I specialize mostly in projects that have already gone off rails or are about to go off rails, and then bring them back to green, like bring them in a good state. So I do a lot of refactoring in the projects I've done, and a lot of optimization and replacing broken or at least solutions that no longer scale with organization or no longer fit for purpose. Replace them with new solutions that are compliant with the new requirements and sales best practices and non-functional requirements and architecture principles.
Okay, so you're basically, you clean up after the others. What is your almost like, no, let's not, people build for the time being, but what was the, let's say, the funniest thing you had to remove, or the craziest thing you removed?
That's a difficult one. Well, one of the biggest problems I've seen was an org that had a lot of code, and I mean a lot of code, many Apex triggers. And the problem was that most, if not all, of the Apex triggers did not use the old map, new map comparison. So
no.
if you would just click edit and save without changing anything, it would still trigger pretty much all automation.
Okay, this must have led to a lot of undesired outcomes.
Definitely. Apart from the obvious one, which is performance, like on some objects you could edit and save without doing anything, and would already take half a minute or even a minute, which was insane. But there were also functional outcomes, like business outcomes, that were definitely undesirable.
Nice. Okay. Now we talked a lot about Salesforce, the nitty-gritty, the hands-on, we both like that, but you made it to director level. And we both know director at Capgemini, this is not an easy task. You basically revolutionized my thinking about what it means to be a Salesforce expert by introducing me to the four pillars of leadership at an SI. Maybe you can elaborate. So all your audience now, start writing it down, because it really is amazing. It blew me away. 4 pillars of leadership at an SI by Kid Jansen.
Well, quite simple. You have the expert role, which the architects typically are. Then there's people management, which you always have at large corporates. Like there are managers, there are directors, there are VPs or partners. So there's a sort of hierarchy. So you have to manage people. There's sales. You always have sales because, well, you need to have a pipeline. You need to do projects, and they don't come in on their own. And then there's the delivery management, like the project management aspect to the programs and projects that we do.
And you told me that in order for you to become director, you needed to be proficient in all 4 of them to a certain extent.
Yes. Yeah, so you cannot get to director level with, or typically at least, with just one of them. That definitely applies for experts. Like with people management, yes, you can be a practice manager or even higher than that. And then you can focus pretty much only on people management and still get to that level. Same to some extent for sales. But it becomes a lot more difficult for experts. So as a developer, you could never get to that level just being a developer.
Even as an architect?
As an architect, it's on the edge. You have to be a really exceptional architect to get to that level. Well, just focusing on the experts, I would say it's not really feasible. Maybe in theory it should be possible, but it's very unlikely. But as an architect, you also do people management. You also do sales. You also manage delivery. You manage projects. So most of us as architects are delivery architects. Like we focus on delivering projects and programs to our clients. But you could also participate on RFPs and RFIs and other bids and sales activities, which is a sales aspect. But just that it's called sales doesn't mean that only salespeople do it. On a bid, you still have an architect because, well, someone has to decide based on the requirements that the client provides what the solution should roughly look like, and based on that, what kind of skills you need, and how does that translate to the roles you have in your organization and the seniorities for those roles, and the estimations, how those translate in how much you need of each role. Then there's the dependencies, which translate into when you need each role compared to one another. So all those are an aspect of delivery management, which will turn into, once it goes into delivery, they're an aspect of sales management. And when you are a lead architect on a large program or large project, you also manage other architects, you manage developers, maybe not fully as a people manager because they have their direct managers in the organization, more from an organizational perspective. But within the context of that single program or project, they report to you. You are sort of their manager. And that means that even as an architect, you are, in most cases, already doing all four. Or at least should be doing all four.
You should be. This is a good, there's so much I want to deep dive. One thing we talked about a little bit is about people management. You also changed my thinking there. I always thought people management means approving vacations, hiring people, doing the one-on-ones. But you told me people management is so much more, networking and stuff like that, leading, motivating.
Yeah, it's coaching, it's mentoring, it's leading, and all aspects that come with it. So I became also a chief architect last year, which is an internal certification at Capgemini. And in order to get there, I had to be a community leader in Capgemini, which meant I had to grow the community both quantitatively and qualitatively. And you do that by mentoring people, by coaching them, by sponsoring them. So I sponsored many other architects for the lower levels of certification, because to sponsor someone for the, let's say, the second level, you have to be the third level, for instance. And also try to get more people involved in the community, because some people were not even aware that it existed and that you had these certification levels, or they needed some coaching to get to a certain level by pointing them out to the right courses and other training material, or what kind of project or program they should be on to get the right experience to get to that level. And all those aspects are community management, they are architecture, or these architecture related, because you do it as an architect for other architects, but there's also a people management component to it.
So all the experience you got running the meanest, toughest Benelux study group, I still remember the moment I applied. This prepared you for becoming director?
Yes. In fact, I even listed it in my application for the director. I listed it in my application for chief architect, because they also care about your exposure, both internally and externally. So if you if you're a familiar name, familiar face, on community events, and especially if it's professional events like TDX or Dreamforce, then that makes a huge difference, because people might even want to start working for an organization because they know you and you know that you work there. One of the best things I've ever done was the Plural Site course I recorded with Don Robbins, which was really a happy accident, because I think Jan van der Velde, I think, was supposed to record a CPQ course with him, but he was not available last minute. And I remember that Sergey asked me, like, hey, Don is going to be in Amsterdam. Do you want to record a course with him next week? And I was like, well, I've nothing prepared, but what should it be about? And I already had a topic because it was the same week as You're Dreaming. I rehashed that topic into a course, recorded it, but I still have people coming up to me, like, because of that course. Like when I was at TDX in March, some people came up to me like, hey, you're Kid Jansen, right? And yeah, that's right. Yeah, I know you from that Plural Site course. Well, that was back in 2019. So 4 years ago. And when I'm in San Francisco, which is, I think, about 10,000 kilometers away from Amsterdam, people walk up to me like, hey, I know you from that course. So exposure matters. Like being a face in the community means a lot to large organizations because it also gives them more credibility and more exposure.
So I take away from you, the architect is much more than the technical expert or delivery expert, but also always into people to some extent.
Yes, you have to be a community player, you have to be a people manager, you have to be involved in sales, and to some extent you have to at least understand delivery management. You don't have to be a project manager or engagement manager yourself, but you need to understand that role because you will collaborate with the person responsible for that extensively, especially if you're a lead architect. You have to be a thought leader. You have to work on your exposure, on your personal branding. And I'm lucky there that I have my size working for me. I have my name. Like there are many people named Jansen in the Netherlands, but I've never found anyone so far named Kid Jansen. And even people named Kid are very rare, at least with my spelling. So that also helps. But yeah, you have to be known for something.
You have to be known. I think this is a good wrapping up there. You have to be known for something. So you don't even try. I remember I take back to the Benelux study group. You had a very specific strategy with the Benelux study group. Maybe you introduced the wider audience to your strategy for the Benelux. Maybe as a contrast, the SIMA group, which I was founding with, had from the starting very clear of being very opening, very welcoming, as broad as possible, as very, let's say, beginner friendly as possible. While the Benelux study group went a different route, which personally, hey, I think both routes are amazing. What was your route, Kit?
From the start, it was, as the name suggests, Benelux. So back then you had to be located in the Benelux because we did on-site meetups. And that was quite insane because we had people traveling for 3 hours just to be at an on-site meetup in the evening and then travel back from Belgium. And another requirement was that you already had to have both application architects and system architects -1, I believe it was back then. So you had the 5 designer certs like data sharing, integration, dev lifecycle, and identity and access management. So you could be, and of course PD1. So you could be missing one of those back then to join the group, but not more than that. Later it became that you already had to have both in full. So system architect, application architect already in full. Otherwise you couldn't join. But it's also about participation.
I remember that one. This is a good one.
We don't want leechers in our group. So if you only attend and always have your camera off and your microphone off and you're just watching, that's not how it works. We record all our meetups, but we don't share them online. We don't even share them within the group. There's one person who gets it, and that's the presenter. And the only exception is that if the presenter approves and someone couldn't make it but notified us up front, then we share the recording with them as well. But if you were no-show and then later ask like, yeah, I couldn't make it, but can you still send me the recording? It's going to be a no. Like, we want you to participate actively. So that means really being there when you say you're going to be there, judging for others, presenting every once in a while, or taking up a leadership role in the group. But if you were not active, we simply cut you from the group.
Like, and I remember you cut me really hard, really fast. I think it was like I missed 2 or 3 meetings, but honestly, your success speaks for yourself. How many members do you have now in your group, in the Benelux study group?
Right now, 114, I believe.
Yeah, I think
we've had over 350 members in total. But as I said, if you're too inactive, you're cut. But
yeah, even if you're CTA, not even a CTA title protects you there.
CTA stay, but only if you were not cut before you became CTA. So you were cut before you became. But I can re-add you.
I know. But
CTAs are members for life. But I think the success speaks for itself when I say that I think we already had over 40 CTAs from our group.
I think let's say the other way around. If you want to become CTA nowadays, you should go to your group, because I found it the most in-depth discussions afterwards. Like people stay for hours.
Yeah, it's not always that long anymore. Like we typically have it for 2.5 hours nowadays for the full mocks. But we do have great judging. So I try to have a CTA if possible. That's not always possible as a judge. But even the other people in the group who are not CTA yet, who are also working towards their CTA, because we have these rules of already having application and system architects and being an active member, that already gets you the right people. They are focused, they are working towards their CTA, they're motivated, and that means that because they're also working towards themselves, they might not know everything yet, but they have their own specialties. And if you put 3 of them together, they will all have different specialties. So together, they are still a great judge because they can identify pretty much all the gaps of the candidate presenting. And it's a good concept. And what works for us is the sheer volume, because we have a lot of meetups. I think we're at 117 now. For just for this year alone, we had 42 meetups scheduled.
Amazing. Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. So turning it over. So you run the Benelux study group. It helped you with personal training, but there was also something with personal branding. You told me about, so you made it, you joined Capgemini, and 3.5 years later, you already are at director level. You told me your journey. This is amazing. Like most people don't even make it the director. You have been that fast. How did you do it that fast?
That's a fun
It's
story.
Yeah.
It's for me, it's learning to play the game. So you cannot be too synthetic about it, but there's always hoops you have to jump through. There's checkboxes you have to acquire, and that should be your priority. And at the same time, of course, you have to focus on your growth. So you have to be successful in your role. Obviously, you have to grow both in depth and in breadth. But apart from that, there are those things that really fall more in the checkbox area. They are not really a key aspect of your role. They fall a bit out of your comfort zone, not really your specialty, but you still have to do them. Otherwise, if you won't get the chance to promote. And that's something that I learned quite quickly. And the fun thing is that I learned that best from gaming way back in the day. I didn't game that much, but there was one phase, first year of university, when I gamed a lot, way too much actually, and I wanted to be the best at it. So I was going through all the forums. I had tons of Excel sheets. I was reverse engineering the game basically. And it's the same for this. You really have to reverse engineer sometimes what you have to do, and that leads to all kinds of new successes. Like I did the same for chief architect. There was a sort of set way for that level in Capgemini that they were typically architects focusing on custom development, like really from scratch architecture, no platform, like no SaaS or PaaS to start with. And I was the first chief architect for Salesforce, not because I was the best architect for Salesforce, but just because I wanted to get it. I thought I could do it, and I just reverse engineered the process to identify what I had to work on, what I had to do, and still took me over a year to get it. It's not like you cannot be too synthetic about it. You still have to do the work. It's still real work, but it doesn't mean that you don't have to. You can't be focused about it. It's the same with CTA. So, like when you do the Flow Republic course from SAP, he sends you this huge self-assessment list with I think it was over 1,000 points, and you have to score yourself, your skill level.
It was so painful. It was so
on all those points. It's the same thing. You have
it's
to
so painful. You go through and like nothing. Maybe I know. I get your point. So
exactly. So it's the same thing. You have to identify all your gaps, and then start working on them. But you can really target them and ask your manager, like, "Hey, can I get a project that does something with this? Because I have a gap here. I need to work on this. But yeah, if I continue on this program or this project, I will never get the opportunity to work on it." So you really have to be proactive in identifying your gaps, then asking your network internally, how you can work on it if you don't know yourself, or to give you the opportunity to work on it, and then just work on it and keep track of your results. It's also very hard sometimes to remember all the things you've done over the years. So if you have a success, make sure to also record it somewhere for yourself, so that if you later on need it for promotion or certification, that you still have a record of it, because you will have to provide proof. And if then you only have a vague memory and you have to, rehash it, and might have been like this, not sure, it won't come across very convincing. So they probably won't let you go through.
So I take away as well is, I take away a lot from you, but blind hard work is not the key to getting promoted.
No, it's targeted hard work. You have to be smart about it. It's the same with CTA. Like you have a goal, and then you identify those gaps and you start working towards it. But just working hard, like you can do the most complex projects, but if they all have the challenges in the same areas, then even after all those projects, you might still have some gaps. And even
I remember
if you all kinds of different projects, you will never cover everything. Salesforce nowadays is so insanely large that just from real life experience, you can never cover everything. So there's always things you just have to study.
I remember early in my career, I learned something funny. I was part of an interview, and we had a guy in front of us, and he interviewed for a senior Salesforce consultant position. And he said, I have 7 years of experience maintaining a Service Cloud implementation. And my team lead back then was like, doesn't actually matter for us, because you did 7 years the same thing. There's not 7 years experience. You have basically half a year experience, but you did it 14 times over. And I think this is what you also say. You have to have you have to go in areas that are painful. What was painful for you, for example? We have to diversify. What was
it's also the same. It basically comes also to working out. Like,
I know.
If you're working out and you always stay at the same weight, then you will never progress. Well, that's not true. You will progress slightly, but way less than you would if you use that overcompensation. Like the whole point of working out is that you always try to exceed your loss limit. And of course not by 10% or 15% or 20%, but it's like plus 2%, plus 2%, plus 2%. And if you do that for every week or every 2 weeks for a couple of years on end, then you make real progress. And of course you have diminishing returns, but it's the same thing here. You always have to push yourself. So if you are at really a casual level, like going smooth, not really pressuring yourself, then you won't grow as much, and your years of experience won't say as much. That's also why I really like that we have assessments at Capgemini in the hiring process, which I also conduct, by the way. Because it's not all about certifications. It's not all about years of experience. It's what you've done with those years of experience and how hard you worked in those years and how diverse your projects were. And that's how you learn. If you do the same thing a million times over, you will be very smart, very good at that thing, but you might not know anything else.
And I hope, for example, I hope our listeners is the same, Kid. I'm open to there. Is oftentimes, let's say, I know from my CTA journey, I had a big lack in enterprise experience. So what I did, I interviewed a lot of people who work on enterprise level. And I hope, for example, my lack of current experience with big SIs, I can compensate a little bit by talking to people like you. So sometimes it's enough to get second-hand experience. Is that correct?
Yeah, of course, you cannot do everything. You cannot do everything firsthand. So just having been involved in something, even if you're only in listen-only mode in a meeting, like my first CXO experience, like really the C-suite, I was on listen-only mode. So I was not really involved in the conversation, but it's still very meaningful to be part of the conversation, just as a sort of fly in the wall, because you still get to learn what people ask, what people say, how to communicate, what style, how the whole dynamic of the conversation goes. That's still helpful. And even if someone tells you afterwards, there's still some value to that. There's still something you can learn from it and take with you. The first time you have to do it yourself for real.
And then with that, I want to share one more takeaway. We talked about the topic of change management.
Yes.
So maybe the headline is, why do projects fail? What's one of the other way around? What's one of the limiting factors for companies to implement Salesforce? Of course, budget, of course, resources, but what's the other limiting factor from your point of view?
Well, you already said it, change management. Like there's only so much change management that organizations can handle, especially when they move from a completely different solution. Like if they're already using a modern CRM, especially if it's a cloud CRM, then it's not that hard to migrate to Salesforce. But if they are still using on-premises CRM systems that might be 10, 15 years old, completely different architecture, outdated business processes, or simply different business processes, then it can not just be a huge change for organization from a technical perspective, like from an architectural perspective, but also for the business. Like it's a different way of working for all the people using the system. And if they don't really adopt the system, if they don't like it, don't like the way it works, the way the processes are designed, the steps involved, or the user interface, like Salesforce, even though it's already quite denormalized, I still often get feedback that you have to navigate all over the place in the opportunity process, for instance, because you have opportunity line items, quote line items, then order line items. Of course, there's still the accounts, the contact. There's already 8 objects. That's 8 pages, because, well, normally in Salesforce, it's 1 page per object. So if they are used to having one screen that combines all of them, of course, you have the console interface in Salesforce, so you also have that, but it can still be very different for them, and they are not willing to accept that, or not able to accept that, or cannot handle the change. Then it will be a limiting factor of what you can accomplish. So you might have to start smaller, and that will have an impact on your solution, because the way I see it, change management helps you balance your architecture in Salesforce to a healthy state.
So change management is not only I make the company change, but also I get feedback on how much change they can absorb. So I build their solution according to the willingness or the possibility to change. So if they are not willing
that's one aspect, but the other is also that you have to use change management to get to a healthy solution, because like we discussed earlier, Salesforce, it's cloud, it's SaaS, it's multi-tenant. You get a lot of functionality out of the box. The idea is that you leverage that functionality, that you use it, not work around it and build something quite similar but slightly different next to it. So best practices say that, well, you follow the standard process, for instance, for opportunity and quote and order, build over buy over build. So if possible, use the app exchange instead of building something custom yourself. Or use a standard Salesforce cloud to solve a requirement, and then customize on top of that. But that might not fit with their current processes, with their current way of working. But if you then decide to build a completely custom solution on Salesforce, then it's very likely that at some point it will start breaking, or at least will stop performing. So to get to a healthy solution, you need change management to balance changing the system, so Salesforce, to the organization, with changing the organization to fit the system.
So I might, for example, coming back to your opportunity example, maybe it's necessary to code a custom opportunity page because the company is really out of change effort. They can't do any more change. So I might have to bite the bullet and say, yes, okay, we recode the old screen for this.
But that could still be a good solution, but it would be different if you decide, well, we don't like the way it works in Salesforce, so we build a completely custom data model for it. If then later on you decide to still use Service Cloud or Sales Cloud, then you will get all kinds of conflicts, because, well, most standard solutions, if not all of them, will want to use Sales Cloud. They're compatible with Sales Cloud and not with your custom model. So you are then stuck in a solution direction, and you might have to tear down a lot of things you built previously to refactor it to fit Sales Cloud if you want to change that later on. So you have to decide what the impact is and how easy it is to tear down. Like if it's something on the UI level, then it's really close to the end user. There are typically not many features dependent on UI components because it's at the end of the line. But if you do something in the data model or something in a really widely used business service, then it will have much more impact if you want to refactor that.
So I take one more message here to all of our architect friends out there. If you get away with coding an UI level instead of changing the data model, always go with the UI level because it's easier to change later on.
Well, not always will probably not be the right answer, but in many cases, it's likely to be safer to make a change on the UI level than to make a change on the data model level or in sharing or in a coded business service.
This is almost the opposite of what we admins did in the past. In the past, we did everything on database level.
Yeah, but then you have many more dependencies. Like the lower you
I know,
get
it's always
architecture, then the more dependencies you get on top of that. And at some point, it feels like replacing the foundation of a skyscraper, while at the same time trying to keep the skyscraper upright. It doesn't really work. So the more you build on top of it, the harder it will be to replace, to refactor, even to modify or to extend or to scale. So if you have to make any compromises on implementation health, make them as far to the top as possible. So you have as few dependencies on it as possible, which make it easier to refactor later on.
So I might rather spend, let's say, a week development time today on a Lightning Web component than adding a couple of fields on database level which should not be there.
Maybe, yes.
Maybe, and it's not general, but I never thought about it this way.
Could very well be true, yes.
I never thought about it this. Stay away from the database as far as possible, as long as possible, because it's connects.
I've seen implementations that were on limited edition that were almost at the limit of number of custom fields that you could have on a single object. And I think, if I remember correctly, 97% of those were used less than 1% of the time.
And still, everything was built on top of it, so you couldn't even remove it. I was part of an org where we had 500 fields on the opportunity, and even every single field, even if it's not used, was painful to remove. Really painful.
Yeah, I've seen fields that were also like a set of fields that should have been an object that repeated 12 times or even 16 times on an object. Well, if you do that 6 fields 16 times, you already have 96 fields. So it goes quite rapidly. But then if you build all kinds of automation on top and reporting and dashboarding, then it will be very hard to replace later on. Like, okay, it should have been a separate object with just 6 fields. Yeah, try to change that back. Like, maybe you can do some smart regex scripting to do it very, very quickly in your IDE. But it will still be a real challenge to replace that later on.
Yeah, good. With that, I want to wrap it up. Kit, final question. What's next for you? You reached it all. You're director, you are chief architect at Capgemini. What's next? You have the most...
Not a CDA yet, so still CDA is on the roadmap. Don't know when yet, probably next year. But for me, the challenge is mostly that I'm not a really great student. So I learn best from doing it. Yeah, I learn best from doing it myself. So I need I'm more of a practical learner. So I have some gaps. I'm looking for a project to tackle those gaps, and then hopefully I can also do a real attempt at CTA. And the nice thing about Capgemini, which I really like, is that it's fully dual ladder. So you can go all the way to the top and still be in that expert role.
Oh, really?
While doing, of course, the other 3 pillars. But you can be a vice president or even executive vice president and still be an architect or a CTO. And we also have a certification level for that, which is master architect. So next goal in Capgemini is master architect and VP.
Nice. Did you already write down the game for becoming vice president and master architect?
One step at a time. I just became director, so bit of
Nah,
a
come
break. But then in a couple months, I'll maybe start with the first plan.
So final question. If the final, if our friends who are listening from all over the world now all want to relocate to Netherlands and become part of the Capgemini team, how should they contact you?
Probably easiest on LinkedIn. That's probably where you post this.
Yes, and honestly, LinkedIn is on this is nothing to do with that. LinkedIn became almost my email client nowadays. Like, to get in contact with people, it's my main way of contacting people. Even people I've worked with, I use LinkedIn oftentimes. It's just the fastest way of doing.
Yeah, internally I don't use it that much because then I usually use Teams. But if it's people outside of Capgemini or outside of Salesforce and people I have the phone number or email address for, then yes, I also use LinkedIn a lot.
Because technically, the two of us, we both have email addresses of each other. I think we have phone numbers. I don't even know, but we still contact each other via LinkedIn.
Fair enough, we did.
Yeah, you're
okay,
right.
you're right.
It's our Facebook. Let's admit it. So, kids, there's one more thing for you. I hope. I wish you a really nice evening. Thank you very much for taking the time. And see you as a VP of Capgemini.
Thank you, and thanks for having
me.
Bye. Have a good evening.